There's no shortage of miracle food claims online. One week it's a berry from a remote mountain region. The next it's some obscure seed that supposedly reverses aging overnight. Almost none of it holds up. But underneath all that noise, there's a genuinely well-researched body of evidence pointing to a small, specific set of foods that show up again and again in serious nutrition science on healthy aging, particularly research on the MIND diet, a hybrid of the Mediterranean and DASH diets designed specifically to study brain health in older adults. Today I want to walk through 5 of those foods, what the actual research shows, how strong that evidence really is, and how much of each you'd realistically want to eat based on the studies themselves. This isn't a hype list. It's what shows up consistently across large observational studies and, increasingly, in randomized trials. Why the MIND diet research matters here. Before getting into the individual foods, it's worth understanding where a lot of this evidence comes from. Researchers developed something called the MIND diet, Mediterranean DASH intervention for neurodegenerative delay, specifically to identify which foods within the broader Mediterranean and DASH dietary patterns were most strongly associated with slower cognitive decline. Rather than just recommending eat healthy, researchers scored people's diets based on how much of specific food groups they ate, then tracked cognitive outcomes over years. A major trial published in the New England Journal of Medicine, along with a large body of earlier observational research, found that several specific food categories were repeatedly and independently linked to slower cognitive aging, reduced markers of Alzheimer's-related brain changes, and better performance on memory and thinking tests. The 5 foods below are the ones that show up most consistently across that research. 1. Green leafy vegetables. Of everything studied in this area, green leafy vegetables, spinach, kale, collard greens, and similar vegetables have some of the strongest and most consistent evidence behind them, specifically for brain health. A study published in the journal Neurology followed older adults and found that people who ate about 1 serving of green leafy vegetables per day had a rate of cognitive decline equivalent to being roughly 11 years younger compared to those who rarely ate them. That's a striking number, and it's held up as one of the most frequently cited findings in this entire area of research. A separate analysis specifically comparing food groups within diet and dementia research identified leafy greens as the single most important dietary component associated with fewer Alzheimer's-related brain changes found in post-mortem examinations. The proposed mechanism involves specific nutrients concentrated in leafy greens, including vitamin K, lutein, folate, and beta-carotene, which are believed to have antioxidant and anti-inflammatory effects that may help protect brain tissue over time. How much the research suggests, the MIND diet's recommendation is at least 1 serving of green leafy vegetables daily. That's a modest amount, a cup of raw spinach or a half cup of cooked kale, not a massive daily salad requirement. 2. Berries. Berries, particularly blueberries and strawberries, are one of the few fruits singled out specifically in this research, rather than fruit being treated as one general category. A long-running study following participants for years found that women who ate more blueberries and strawberries had a slower rate of cognitive decline, with the effect for blueberries in particular associated with delays of up to roughly 2.5 years compared to those who ate the least. Researchers attribute this to flavonoids, a category of plant compounds with antioxidant and anti-inflammatory properties that berries contain in high concentrations relative to most other fruits. This is part of why the MIND diet specifically recommends berries over other fruit, rather than just more fruit in general. Other fruits are still healthy, but berries are the ones with the more direct research link to cognitive outcomes. How much the research suggests. The MIND diet recommends at least 2 servings of berries per week. A serving is typically about half a cup, so this is a genuinely achievable target, not a requirement to eat berries daily. 3. Nuts. Nuts show up consistently in this research as well, both for cognitive health and for cardiovascular outcomes, which matter for aging since heart health and brain health are closely connected. Poor blood flow affects the brain just as much as the heart. Research on nut consumption has linked regular intake to better cognitive performance and slower age-related decline, along with the well-established cardiovascular benefits of nuts, including improved cholesterol profiles. The MIND diet doesn't specify one particular type of nut as superior, and researchers generally recommend varying the type you eat. Walnuts, almonds, pistachios, and others each provide a slightly different nutrient profile. How much the research suggests. The MIND diet recommends 5 or more servings per week, with a serving being roughly a small handful, about an ounce. This is one of the easier targets to hit, since nuts work well as a snack or a topping on other meals. 4. Fatty fish. Fish, specifically fatty fish, rich in omega-3 fatty acids like salmon, sardines, and mackerel, has one of the more established research bases in this entire list, going back further than the more recent Mind diet research specifically. Studies have found that regular fish consumption is associated with higher cognitive function and slower cognitive decline with age. The proposed mechanism centers on omega-3 fatty acids, particularly DHA, which is a major structural component of brain cell membranes and has documented anti-inflammatory properties. It's worth noting that the recommended amount has actually increased as more recent research has come in. Earlier versions of the Mind diet recommended 1 serving of fatty fish per week. More recent guidance, reflecting newer evidence, has moved toward 2 to 3 servings per week. How much the research suggests? Aim for at least 1 serving weekly, with newer research supporting 2 to 3 servings per week as potentially more beneficial. A serving is roughly 3 to 4 ounces, about the size of a deck of cards. 5. Olive oil. Olive oil is the fat source specifically emphasized across both the Mediterranean and Mind diets, and it's treated differently from other cooking oils in this research, not just lumped in as any healthy fat. The evidence here spans both cardiovascular and cognitive outcomes. Olive oil, particularly extra virgin olive oil, contains monounsaturated fats along with polyphenols, plant compounds believed to have neuroprotective effects, that researchers believe contribute to its association with slower cognitive decline and reduced markers of Alzheimer's-related brain pathology in long-term studies. How much the research suggests? The Mind diet recommends using olive oil as your primary cooking and food preparation oil rather than a specific serving size, replacing butter, margarine, and other oils where practical. How strong is this evidence? Honestly, I want to be direct about what kind of evidence this actually is, because that matters for how much confidence to place in it. Most of the strongest findings, the leafy green study, the berry studies, and much of the foundational nut and fish research, come from large observational studies, meaning researchers tracked what people already ate and followed their health outcomes over years. This is valuable, real evidence, but it's a different category from a randomized controlled trial, where researchers actually assign people to eat differently and compare outcomes. That said, this is one of the few areas of nutrition science where a large randomized trial has actually been run. A trial published in the New England Journal of Medicine randomly assigned older adults to either follow the Mind diet with a mild calorie reduction or follow a standard heart-healthy diet with the same mild calorie reduction and tracked cognitive outcomes over 3 years. Both groups showed cognitive improvement, and the trial did not find a statistically significant difference between the Mind diet group and the control group in this particular study. An important, honest detail that's sometimes left out of Mind diet coverage. Researchers noted this may partly reflect that the control diet used in the trial was already fairly healthy, making it harder to detect a difference, and cautioned that this doesn't cancel out the substantial observational evidence built up over the prior decade. A more recent 5-year study comparing Mind and Mediterranean diet adherence in over 1,500 participants, some already diagnosed with Alzheimer's disease, found that people with strong adherence to either diet showed better memory and thinking test scores, lower levels of proteins associated with Alzheimer's disease, and slower shrinkage of the hippocampus, the brain's memory center, on brain imaging. So the honest summary is, the observational evidence for these 5 foods, especially leafy greens and berries, is genuinely strong and consistent across many studies. The randomized trial evidence is more mixed, with at least one major trial not finding a significant advantage over an already healthy control diet. This doesn't mean these foods don't matter. It means the research is still evolving, and claims of certainty in either direction go beyond what the evidence currently supports. Putting it together, none of these 5 foods needs to be eaten in extreme quantities or as a strict, difficult protocol. Based on the actual research recommendations, green leafy vegetables most days of the week, berries a couple of times a week, a small handful of nuts most days, fatty fish once or twice a week, and olive oil as your primary cooking fat. That's a realistic, sustainable pattern, not a restrictive diet plan, and it lines up with a much broader body of research on cardiovascular health as well, since heart and brain health are closely linked. A note on limitations. This is general nutrition information, not personalized medical advice. If you're on blood thinners, olive oil and certain nuts generally don't pose an interaction concern. But if you have specific dietary restrictions related to kidney disease, a nut allergy, or another medical condition, it's worth checking with your doctor or a registered dietitian about how these recommendations fit your individual situation. And no single food or diet pattern is a guaranteed prevention against cognitive decline or Alzheimer's disease. Genetics, overall health, physical activity, sleep, and many other factors all play a role. Of everything studied for healthy aging and cognitive health, leafy greens, berries, nuts, fatty fish, and olive oil are the 5 foods with the most consistent research behind them, largely through work on the Mind diet and its predecessor, the Mediterranean diet. The observational evidence is strong and has held up across many studies. The randomized trial evidence is promising but more mixed, and researchers are honest about that. Building a pattern that includes these 5 foods regularly is a reasonable, well-supported choice for long-term health. Not a guarantee, but one of the better documented dietary habits available.